I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda Patterson standing on my driveway at 7 in the morning, her breath forming angry little clouds in the frigid February air. She was clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the plastic, as she surveyed my garage with the kind of look usually reserved for crime scenes. I had just come back from an early morning ride on my snowmobile through the trails behind Pinecrest Estates, my small subdivision nestled in the mountains outside Bozeman, Montana. The machine was still ticking as it cooled down, and I was still wearing my insulated gear, goggles pushed up on my forehead. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning stillness, "I need to speak with you about a serious violation." I pulled off my gloves slowly, buying time to figure out what fresh hell the HOA had cooked up this time. Brenda was the president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association, a position she'd held for 6 years and wielded like a scepter. She was somewhere in her late 40s, with that particular shade of blonde that came from a bottle and a wardrobe consisting entirely of athleisure, where despite never setting foot in a gym. "Morning, Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What violation would that be?" She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with theatrical precision. "We've received multiple complaints about excessive noise from your snowmobile. Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that residents are prohibited from creating or allowing excessive noise that disturbs the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties." I glanced at my watch. It was 7:03 a.m. on a Saturday. "Brenda, it's 7 in the morning." I was out on the trails for about an hour. The noise ordinance in Gallatin County doesn't even kick in until 10 p.m., and that's for nighttime. The HOA bylaws supersede county ordinances when it comes to community standards, she said, her chin lifting slightly. "You'll be receiving a formal notice of violation in the mail, along with a fine of $500. $500. I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "For riding a snowmobile in Montana in winter. That's what people do here." "That's what people do on their own private property or in designated recreational areas," she corrected. "Not in a residential community where people are trying to enjoy their weekend mornings in peace. The fine is due within 30 days, or it will increase to $750. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing in my driveway with my mouth hanging open. I looked down at my snowmobile, a perfectly maintained Polaris that I'd bought last year specifically because Bozeman's winters were legendary, and the trail system was incredible. I'd done my research before buying here. There were no specific prohibitions against snowmobiles in the bylaws when I'd moved in 3 years ago. Inside, I stripped off my cold weather gear and made coffee, my mind racing. This wasn't the first run-in I'd had with Brenda and her HOA cronies. Last summer, they'd threatened to fine me because my lawn was 2.5 inches tall instead of the mandated 2 inches. The summer before that, they'd sent me a warning letter because I'd left my garbage cans visible from the street for 3 hours past the pickup time. But $500 for riding a snowmobile in Montana felt like a bridge too far. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through the HOA bylaws, the original documents I'd received when I bought the house. Section 4.7 did mention excessive noise, but the definition was vague. It referenced unreasonable disturbances without specifying decibel levels or time frames. I made notes, screenshots, and started building a file. The formal notice arrived 4 days later, exactly as Brenda had promised. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by her and 2 other board members. Gary Simmons and Patricia Keller. The letter reiterated the $500 fine and added that continued violations could result in additional fines of up to $1,000 per incident and potential legal action to place a lien on my property. That last part made my blood run cold. I'd worked hard to buy this house. After my divorce 5 years ago, I'd rebuilt my life from scratch, working as a civil engineer for a firm in Bozeman. This house represented stability, independence, and a fresh start. The idea that Brenda Patterson could threaten that over a snowmobile was infuriating. I called my buddy Marcus Chen, who lived 2 streets over in the same subdivision. Marcus was a contract lawyer who worked from home, and he'd had his own battles with the HOA over the years. "They're serious this time," I told him after explaining the situation. "They're threatening a lien." "They can do that if it's in the bylaws and you don't pay," Marcus said, his voice grave. "But $500 for snowmobile noise, that seems excessive. What time were you riding?" "Between 6 and 7 a.m., and I'm not riding through the neighborhood. I'm going out on the trails behind the development." "But you have to start the machine in your driveway, and that's technically within the community," Marcus said, thinking out loud. "Still, this feels like overreach. You know what's interesting? I've noticed their landscaping crew has been coming earlier and earlier. They were here at 6:30 last Tuesday with leaf blowers and hedge trimmers. Woke up my whole house. That stopped me cold." "Say that again." "The HOA's landscaping company. They've been showing up really early." I figured they were trying to beat the heat, but it's February. There is no heat. An idea began forming in my mind, sparked by years of engineering training that taught me to measure, document, and prove. "Marcus, how would you feel about helping me with a little experiment?" We met at a coffee shop in downtown Bozeman the next morning. I brought my laptop and a list of questions. Marcus brought his legal expertise and a shared sense of frustration with HOA overreach. "Here's what I'm thinking," I said, pulling up a spreadsheet. "If they're going to fine me for noise violations, then the standard has to apply equally to everyone, including their contracted services. If I can prove that the landscaping company they hired is generating more noise than my snowmobile, then either my fine is unjust or they need to fine themselves." Marcus grinned. "I like where this is going. You'll need documentation, real measurements." "That's why I need to borrow your decibel meter. I know you bought one last year for that construction dispute." He nodded. "I've got a professional-grade sound level meter that measures in a weighted decibels, which is the standard for environmental noise. You'll want to take readings from multiple locations at different times. Document everything: date, time, location, weather conditions, distance from the source. And I'll need measurements of my own snowmobile for comparison," I added. "Exactly. This is good. You're building a case based on objective data. That's hard to argue with." Over the next week, I became intimately familiar with the concept of noise measurement. A weighted decibels, or dBA, are used because they approximate how the human ear perceives sound. Normal conversation sits around 60 dBA. A vacuum cleaner is about 70 dBA. Anything above 85 dBA for prolonged periods can cause hearing damage. I started with my own snowmobile. On a cold Wednesday morning, I had Marcus come over to take measurements while I started the machine in my driveway and let it idle. At a distance of 50 feet, roughly the distance to my nearest neighbor's house, the Polaris registered 68 dBA while idling and peaked at 78 dBA when I revved it before heading out to the trails. The whole process, from start to departure, took less than 5 minutes. I documented everything with photos, timestamps, and Marcus as a witness. Then we waited for the landscaping crew. They arrived Friday morning at 6:45 a.m. I heard them before I saw them, the distinctive whine of commercial-grade leaf blowers cutting through the dawn quiet. I grabbed the sound meter and my camera and headed outside, staying on my property but positioning myself with clear sight lines to where they worked. The company was called Green Mountain Landscaping, and they had 3 trucks parked along the main boulevard of Pinecrest Estates. 6 workers fanned out across the common areas with equipment: industrial leaf blowers, hedge trimmers, edgers, and a large commercial mower. I started taking readings. The leaf blowers were the worst. From 50 feet away, the same distance I'd measured my snowmobile, they registered 89 dBA. When one of the workers passed within 30 feet of where I stood on my own property line, the meter spiked to 96 dBA. The hedge trimmers were 85 dBA. The edgers hit 88 dBA. And they weren't just running the equipment for 5 minutes. They worked for 2 solid hours. I documented everything. Photos of the trucks with company names visible. Screenshots of the sound meter with timestamps. Video showing the equipment in use with the meter's display clearly visible in the frame. I even noted that the workers weren't wearing hearing protection, which seemed like a safety violation all on its own. Marcus came over that evening to review the data. We sat at my kitchen table with my laptop between us, going through the measurements. "This is damning," he said, scrolling through the photos. "Your snowmobile maxes out at 78 dBA for less than 5 minutes. Their leaf blowers alone are hitting 96 dBA for extended periods. That's not even close." "What's the actual difference in terms of volume?" I asked. "Decibels are logarithmic," Marcus explained. "Every increase of 10 dBA represents a doubling of perceived loudness. So 96 dBA isn't just a little louder than 78 dBA. It's roughly 3 to 4 times louder to the human ear." I sat back, letting that sink in. So when Brenda said I was creating excessive noise, she was complaining about something that's a fraction of the noise her own contracted services create. Correct. And they're doing it earlier in the morning and for much longer periods. You've got a solid case here. The question is what you want to do with it. I thought about that for a long moment. I could pay the fine and let it go, but that felt like rolling over. It wasn't about the money as much as the principle. Brenda and the HOA board needed to understand that rules had to be applied fairly and consistently. "I want to fight it," I said finally. "What are my options?" Marcus pulled out a notepad. "First, you have the right to appeal the fine. The bylaws require the HOA to provide a hearing process. You'll present your evidence to the board, and they'll vote on whether to uphold or dismiss the fine. Second, if that fails, you can take it to small claims court or hire an attorney for a more formal legal challenge. Third, you could go to the other homeowners directly. If enough people are unhappy with the HOA's actions, they can vote to remove board members or change bylaws." "Let's start with the appeal," I said. "I want them to see this data and try to justify their position." I submitted my appeal request the next day, citing the evidence I'd collected and requesting a formal hearing. The bylaws stated that the HOA had to schedule the hearing within 30 days of the request. Brenda called me 2 days later, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation. "We've received your appeal request," she said. "The board will hear your case on March 15th at 7 p.m. in the community center." "Will this hearing be open to other residents?" I asked. "Board hearings are typically closed sessions," she replied quickly. "Actually, the bylaws state that homeowners have the right to attend board meetings unless the board votes to enter executive session for specific legal or personnel matters. An appeal hearing doesn't qualify as either. I'd like this to be open." There was a long pause. I could practically hear her grinding her teeth. "I'll discuss it with the other board members." "Great. I'll plan on it being open unless I hear otherwise. See you on the 15th. I hung up before she could respond, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. I'd read the bylaws front to back multiple times now, and I knew them better than Brenda probably expected. Over the next few weeks, I continued monitoring and documenting the landscaping crew's activities. They came every Friday like clockwork, always early in the morning, always loud. I also started talking to neighbors, casually mentioning the upcoming hearing and the noise measurements I'd taken. The response was eye-opening. Mr. Jennings, an elderly man who lived 3 houses down, told me he'd been complaining about the landscaping noise for months, but had been ignored. Sarah Wu, a young mother of twins, said the leaf blowers woke her babies every Friday morning. Tom Rodriguez mentioned he worked night shifts as an ER nurse, and the early morning landscaping made it impossible to sleep. "You should all come to the hearing," I told each of them. March 15th at 7 p.m. I'm presenting evidence about noise levels, and the board should hear that it's affecting more than just me. By the time March 15th rolled around, I had a meticulously organized presentation. I'd created a PowerPoint with photos, charts comparing decibel levels, timestamps, and even audio recordings. I'd printed copies of the relevant bylaws with key sections highlighted. I had Marcus as an expert witness who could speak to the legal standards for noise measurement. The community center was a modest building at the entrance to Pinecrest Estates, usually used for HOA meetings and the occasional resident event. When I arrived at 6:45 p.m., I was surprised to find the small parking lot nearly full. Even more surprising, there were at least 30 people inside the meeting room, filling the rows of folding chairs that faced a long table where Brenda and the other board members sat. Brenda's expression when she saw the crowd was priceless. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, and a flush crept up her neck. Gary Simmons and Patricia Keller, the other 2 board members, looked equally uncomfortable. "This is quite a turnout," Brenda said, calling the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "I'll remind everyone that board meetings are to be conducted in an orderly fashion. There will be no outbursts or disruptions." She went through the standard opening procedures, approving minutes from the last meeting and discussing routine business items. I noticed she was drawing it out, maybe hoping people would leave. But the crowd stayed, patient and attentive. Finally, she had no choice but to address the main event. "We're here tonight to hear an appeal from Paul Holloway regarding a noise violation fine issued on February 7th. Mr. Holloway, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood up, gathering my laptop and a small projector I'd borrowed from work. "I'll need to use the screen," I said, gesturing to the pull-down projection screen on the wall. Brenda looked like she wanted to object, but with 30 sets of eyes watching, she simply nodded. I set up quickly, connecting my laptop to the projector. My hands were steadier than I expected. This was just like presenting to clients at work, I told myself. Just data and facts. "Thank you for hearing my appeal," I began, clicking to the first slide. It showed a photo of my snowmobile in my driveway, along with the date and time stamp from February 7th. On this morning, I received a violation notice for excessive noise related to my snowmobile. The fine was $500, with threats of additional fines and potential liens for continued violations. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the relevant section of the HOA bylaws. The violation cited Section 4.7, which prohibits excessive noise. However, the bylaws don't define what constitutes excessive noise. There are no specific decibel limits, no time restrictions beyond referencing county noise ordinances, and no objective standards. Brenda leaned forward. The board has discretion to determine what constitutes excessive noise based on resident complaints and common-sense community standards. I understand that, I said calmly, which is why I decided to measure the actual noise levels using objective, scientific methods. With the help of Marcus Chen, who some of you know as a resident here and who owns a professional-grade sound level meter, I measured my snowmobile's noise output. The next slide showed Marcus standing with the sound meter and a chart displaying the measurements. At 50 feet from the source, which is approximately the distance to my nearest neighbor's house, my snowmobile produces 68 decibels while idling and a maximum of 78 decibels when accelerating. The entire duration of the noise from starting the engine to leaving my driveway was 4 minutes and 35 seconds. I paused, looking around the room. People were paying attention, leaning forward, interested. For context, normal conversation is about 60 decibels. A vacuum cleaner is around 70 decibels. My snowmobile falls within the range of ordinary household equipment. But you're not using it for household purposes, Patricia Keller interjected. You're using it for recreation, which disturbs others. That's a fair point, I acknowledged. Recreation does happen in residential communities. People mow their lawns, use power tools, play music. The question is whether my recreational activity is excessive compared to other noise sources in the community. Which brings me to my next set of measurements. I clicked to a new slide showing photos of the Green Mountain landscaping trucks. A murmur went through the crowd. As many of you know, the HOA contracts with Green Mountain Landscaping for common area maintenance. They typically arrive on Friday mornings around 6:45 a.m. Using the same equipment and methodology, I measured their noise levels. The next slide showed a comparison chart. On the left, my snowmobile at 78 dBA maximum. On the right, the landscaping equipment, leaf blowers at 96 dBA, hedge trimmers at 85 dBA, edgers at 88 dBA. The visual difference was striking. As you can see, the landscaping equipment exceeds my snowmobile's noise by a significant margin, but it's even more dramatic than it appears. Decibels are measured on a logarithmic scale. An increase of 10 decibels represents a doubling of perceived loudness to the human ear. That means the leaf blowers at 96 decibels are approximately 3 to 4 times louder than my snowmobile. I clicked through several more slides showing photos of the landscaping crew with timestamp overlays and sound meter readings. Additionally, while my snowmobile produces noise for less than 5 minutes, the landscaping crew operates for approximately 2 hours every Friday morning. That's not a one-time event. It happens weekly, 52 weeks a year. The room was silent now, everyone staring at the screen. I saw several people nodding, a few whispering to their neighbors. I want to be clear, I continued. I'm not saying the landscaping crew shouldn't do their job. Maintenance is necessary. But if I'm being fined $500 for producing 78 decibels for 5 minutes, then consistency demands that the HOA address the significantly louder and longer noise from their own contracted services. Brenda's face had gone from pink to red. The landscaping is necessary for property values and community standards. Your snowmobile is a personal choice. Both are noise sources, I replied. The bylaws don't distinguish between necessary and personal noise. They prohibit excessive noise, period. Either the standard applies to everyone, or it's arbitrary enforcement. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a summary. I'm asking the board to dismiss the fine based on the evidence that my snowmobile does not produce excessive noise compared to other accepted activities in the community. Alternatively, if the board believes 78 decibels for 5 minutes is excessive, then I'm requesting that the same standard be applied to the landscaping services. They should be required to use quieter equipment, work during less intrusive hours, or face the same fines. I closed my laptop and sat down. The room erupted in applause, which seemed to catch everyone, including me, off guard. Brenda hammered her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We need order! This is a board meeting, not a theater." When the room quieted, Marcus stood up. "If I may, I'd like to corroborate Mr. Holloway's measurements. I was present for all of the readings he presented. The equipment used is a professionally calibrated Class 2 sound level meter, which is the standard for environmental noise assessment. The methodology was consistent with EPA and OSHA guidelines for noise measurement. These aren't amateur readings. They're scientifically valid data." Gary Simmons cleared his throat. "Even if we accept these measurements, the fact remains that we received complaints about the snowmobile. We have to respond to resident concerns." "Who complained?" I asked. "I'd like to know who was disturbed by my 5 minutes of snowmobile noise but apparently isn't disturbed by 2 hours of commercial landscaping equipment every week." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Complaint sources are confidential." "Actually," Marcus said, still standing, "the bylaws state that a homeowner accused of a violation has the right to know the nature of the complaint, and in cases involving alleged impacts on specific properties, the identity of the complainant. That's basic due process." "We'll take your presentation under advisement," Brenda said stiffly. "The board will deliberate and provide a decision within 14 days as required by the bylaws." "Before we close," I said, "I'd like to note for the record that several other residents have expressed concerns about the early morning landscaping noise. Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Wu, and Mr. Rodriguez are all here tonight. Perhaps the board should hear from them as well." Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but with the room full of residents watching, she had little choice. "Very well, keep it brief." Mr. Jennings stood up, leaning slightly on his cane. "I've lived here for 12 years. The landscaping noise has gotten worse every year. I'm retired. I like to sleep past 6:30 in the morning. But every Friday those blowers wake me up. I've sent 3 emails to the HOA about it over the past 6 months. I never got a response." Sarah Wu was next, bouncing a baby on her hip. "I have twin infants. Their room faces the common area. Friday mornings are a nightmare in my house. The noise wakes them up, and it takes hours to get them back to sleep. My husband and I are exhausted. When I called the HOA office to ask if the landscapers could come later, I was told that scheduling was not up for discussion." Tom Rodriguez kept it simple. "I work night shifts at the hospital. I get home at 7 a.m. and need to sleep during the day. The landscaping makes that almost impossible. It's a legitimate health concern for me, and apparently the HOA doesn't care." By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that the board was on the defensive. Brenda adjourned hastily, and the board members practically fled to a back room for their private deliberation. I stayed to talk with the residents who'd come to support me, thanking them and exchanging contact information. "You really stuck it to them," Mr. Jennings said with a chuckle. "About time someone called out the hypocrisy." "We'll see what they decide," I said. "They might still uphold the fine and ignore everything else. If they do, we'll vote them out," Sarah Wu said firmly. "I'm sick of Brenda acting like she runs a dictatorship. This is supposed to be a community." The 14-day waiting period felt interminable. I went about my normal routine, going to work, trying not to obsess over the outcome. Marcus told me he was cautiously optimistic. "You made them look foolish in front of a room full of their constituents," he said over beers one evening. "Even if they want to dig in their heels, the political cost is too high. My guess is they'll dismiss the fine and quietly change the landscaping schedule." His guess was half right. The letter arrived on day 13, once again on official HOA letterhead. It was longer than the original violation notice, full of legal language and bureaucratic hedging. The key sentence was buried in the third paragraph. "Upon review of the evidence presented and further consideration of community standards, the board has voted to dismiss the violation notice issued to Paul Holloway on February 7, 2025. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt angry. Because the letter went on to say that the board was reaffirming its commitment to maintaining peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the community, and that all residents are reminded to be considerate of their neighbors regarding noise at all hours. There was no acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. No mention of the landscaping company's excessive noise. No apology for threatening to put a lien on my house over a snowmobile that was quieter than a vacuum cleaner. Just a dismissal and a veiled warning to behave. I called Marcus immediately. They dismissed it, but they're acting like they're doing me a favor, and there's nothing here about the landscaping." "Did you expect them to admit fault?" Marcus asked. "Brenda's ego wouldn't allow it, but you won. The fine is gone." "It's not about winning," I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. "It's about fairness. If they're not going to address the landscaping noise, then nothing has changed. They'll just find some other arbitrary reason to fine me or someone else next month. So what do you want to do?" That was the question. I could let it go, take my victory and move on, or I could push further, force the issue, make them address the double standard. The safe choice was to walk away. The right choice felt like something else entirely. Over the next week, I made my decision. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board about the landscaping company, using the same format and language they'd used on me. I cited Section 4.7 of the bylaws, included all of my noise measurements and documentation, and requested that the board take immediate action to address the excessive noise from Green Mountain Landscaping. I also requested a response within 30 days, as the bylaws required for resident complaints. I sent copies to all 3 board members via certified mail, and I posted about it on the Pinecrest Estates Facebook group, which had about 200 members from the 400 homes in the subdivision. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 days, my post had over 60 comments, most of them from residents who shared their own frustrations with early morning landscaping noise. Several people said they were filing their own complaints. A few suggested organizing to vote out the current board at the next election. Brenda's response came faster than expected. She called me directly, her voice quivering with barely controlled rage. "What you're doing is disruptive and inappropriate. You're undermining the board's authority and creating discord in the community." "I'm filing a legitimate complaint under the bylaws," I said calmly. "The same bylaws you used to fine me. If it was appropriate when you did it, it's appropriate now. The landscaping company is under contract. We can't just change contractors on a whim." "I'm not asking you to change contractors. I'm asking you to address excessive noise, the same issue you cited with my snowmobile. They can use quieter equipment, adjust their schedule, or take other measures to reduce the impact on residents. That's a reasonable request." "This is retaliation," she snapped. "You're upset about the fine, even though we dismissed it, so now you're trying to cause problems." "The fine shouldn't have been issued in the first place," I replied, my own patience wearing thin. "And this isn't retaliation." Multiple residents are complaining about the landscaping noise. Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Wu, and Mr. Rodriguez all spoke at the hearing. This is a real problem that affects a lot of people. If you'd been doing your job and listening to residents all along, we wouldn't be having this conversation. She hung up without another word. I stared at my phone for a moment, then set it down and went back to work. I'd said what needed to be said. The mandatory 30-day response period came and went with no word from the board. On day 32, I sent a follow-up email to all 3 board members, copying the entire HOA email list from the community directory. In it, I politely noted that my complaint had not been addressed within the required time frame and requested an update on when the board planned to respond. That got their attention. Within hours, I received a terse email from Brenda stating that the board would address the landscaping issue at the next monthly meeting, scheduled for April 20th. The meeting agenda was attached, and sure enough, Common Area Landscaping Services Review was listed as an item for discussion. The April 20th meeting drew an even bigger crowd than the March hearing. The small community center was standing room only, with at least 50 residents packed in. The energy in the room was different this time, less curious and more demanding. People weren't just there to watch. They were there to be heard. Brenda looked exhausted as she called the meeting to order. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled. Gary and Patricia looked equally uncomfortable, sitting stiffly in their chairs and avoiding eye contact with the crowd. The meeting started with routine business again, but this time people weren't patient. After about 10 minutes, someone in the back row called out, "When are we getting to the landscaping issue?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "We'll address it when we reach that item on the agenda." "Put it first," another voice said. "That's why we're all here." There was a murmur of agreement. Brenda looked at her fellow board members who both gave small, resigned shrugs. "Very well, we'll move the landscaping discussion forward." She shuffled her papers, taking a moment to compose herself. "The board has reviewed the complaints regarding noise from our contracted landscaping services. We've had conversations with Green Mountain Landscaping about potential adjustments to their schedule and equipment." "What adjustments?" someone asked. "They've agreed to start work no earlier than 7:30 a.m. instead of 6:45, and they'll complete work on each section before moving to the next, which should reduce the overall duration of noise in any one area." "That's not good enough," Tom Rodriguez said, standing up. 7:30 is still too early for people who work night shifts, and the issue isn't just when they work, it's how loud they are. Those leaf blowers are damaging hearing levels. Patricia Keller spoke up for the first time. "We're limited by our contract terms. Making major changes to equipment or scope would require renegotiating the contract or finding a new contractor, which could be expensive." "How much are we paying them?" I asked. Patricia hesitated. "The contract is for $68,000 annually." A ripple of surprise went through the room. "68,000, Marcus said. "For a subdivision this size, that seems high. I used to work with commercial property management. A community of 400 homes with our amount of common area should be paying maybe $40,000 to $50,000 tops." "The contract was negotiated 3 years ago," Gary Simmons said defensively. "Costs have gone up." "Who negotiated it?" I asked. "I did," Brenda said sharply. "I solicited bids from 3 companies, and Green Mountain offered the most comprehensive service package." "Can we see the other bids?" Marcus asked. "That information is confidential," Brenda replied. "Actually, it's not," Marcus countered. "The bylaws require financial transparency. HOA members have the right to review contracts and expenditures." I'd like to make a formal request to see the bids from all three companies and the current contract with Green Mountain. Brenda's face flushed. That request needs to be submitted in writing. Fine. Consider this my verbal notice. I'll send written confirmation tomorrow. And while we're at it, I'd like to see the HOA's financial records for the past 3 years, including all contracts over $10,000. The room went very quiet. Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. Patricia and Gary exchanged glances, and something unspoken passed between them. "Is there a problem with that request?" Marcus pressed. "No problem," Brenda said, but her voice was strained. "The board will comply with the bylaws. You'll have access to the records within the required 14-day period." But I could tell something was off. The way Brenda's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her papers. The way Gary wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The sudden eagerness to end the meeting and clear the room. After the meeting, Marcus and I stood in the parking lot with a group of residents who'd stayed to talk. Sarah Wu was there with her husband, a quiet man named James who worked in IT. Tom Rodriguez had brought his wife, Linda. Mr. Jennings was there too, along with a half-dozen others. "Did that seem weird to you?" Sarah asked. "The way Brenda reacted when you asked about the contract." "Very weird," Marcus agreed. "I've seen that look before in legal cases. That's the look of someone who's hiding something." "You think there's something wrong with the landscaping contract?" I asked. "I think it's worth looking into. $68,000 is a lot of money. If the contract is inflated or if there are kickbacks involved, that would explain why Brenda is so defensive about it." "How would we prove something like that?" Tom asked. "We start with the records request," Marcus said. "Once I have the contracts and financial statements, I can analyze them. If there are irregularities, they'll show up in the numbers." True to the bylaws, the documents arrived exactly 14 days later. Marcus received a thick manila envelope delivered to his house by courier. Inside were copies of the current landscaping contract, bid proposals from 3 companies, and 3 years of financial statements for the HOA. We met at my house that evening to go through everything. Marcus spread the papers across my dining room table, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he organized and cross-referenced documents. "Okay, let's start with the bids," he said, pulling out 3 stapled packets. "These are from 3 years ago when the contract was put out for proposal." The first bid was from Green Mountain Landscaping. $68,000 annually for comprehensive maintenance including mowing, trimming, seasonal planting, and snow removal on common areas. The second bid was from Summit Property Services, $42,000 annually for the same scope of work. The third bid was from Gallatin Grounds Management, $47,000 annually, also for the same services. "Why would they pick the highest bid?" I asked. "The other 2 are significantly cheaper." "That's the question," Marcus said, frowning. "Let me look at the justification." He pulled out a memo dated from 3 years ago, signed by Brenda. It stated that Green Mountain was selected because they offered superior quality and reliability based on references and past performance. But there were no reference letters attached, no documentation of the comparison process, nothing that explained why a company charging 60% more than the competition was worth it. "This doesn't pass the smell test," Marcus said. "A board member can't just pick the most expensive option without justification. That's a breach of fiduciary duty." He moved on to the financial statements, running his finger down columns of numbers. The landscaping contract was the single largest annual expense for the HOA, bigger even than insurance or utilities for the common areas. Then Marcus stopped, his finger frozen on one line. "Wait, look at this." I leaned over to see what he was pointing at. It was a line item from 2 years ago. Consulting fee B. Patterson Services $15,000. B. Patterson, I said slowly. Brenda Patterson could be a coincidence, Marcus said, but he was already flipping through more pages. He found 2 more entries. One from 18 months ago. Consulting fee Patterson Property Management $12,000. Another from last year. Administrative Services B. Pat Consulting $18,000. She's paying herself, I said, feeling a cold anger settle in my chest. She's funneling HOA money to her own companies. Maybe, Marcus said carefully. These could be legitimate consulting fees if she's providing services to the HOA, but they need to be disclosed and approved by the membership. Let me check the meeting minutes. He pulled out another stack of papers, the official minutes from board meetings over the past 3 years. We went through them page by page. There was no mention of any consulting fees paid to Brenda Patterson or any company associated with her. The expenditures had never been voted on by the board or disclosed to the membership. This is embezzlement, Marcus said quietly. She's taking HOA money without authorization, and I'm willing to bet the inflated landscaping contract is part of it. How would that work? Kickbacks. She awards the contract to Green Mountain at an inflated price, and they kick back a percentage to her consulting company. Everyone wins except the HOA members who are paying for it. How much are we talking about total? Marcus did quick math on his phone. The consulting fees add up to $45,000 over 3 years. Plus, if the landscaping contract should be around $45,000 instead of $68,000, that's $23,000 a year in overcharges. Over 3 years, that's $69,000. We're looking at potential theft of over $100,000. I sat back, stunned. I'd expected maybe some sloppy bookkeeping or a sweetheart deal with a friend's company. But actual embezzlement, that was criminal. What do we do? I asked. We go to the police, Marcus said firmly. This is beyond HOA politics. This is fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Brenda needs to be investigated by law enforcement. We spent the next hour making copies of everything, organizing the evidence and preparing a clear timeline. Marcus drafted a written summary explaining what the documents showed and why it constituted probable criminal activity. The next morning, I took everything to the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office in Bozeman. I asked to speak with someone from the Financial Crimes Unit and was directed to Detective Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened intently as I explained the situation. HOA fraud cases are more common than people think, she said, reviewing the documents. Usually it's smaller amounts, reimbursements for fake expenses, that kind of thing. But $100,000 over 3 years, that's significant. What happens now? I asked. I'll need to investigate. That means interviewing board members, getting bank records for the HOA and these consulting companies, talking to the landscaping company. It'll take time. Weeks, possibly months. I'll need you and Mr. Chen to be available for follow-up questions and potentially testimony if charges are filed. We'll cooperate fully, I said. One more thing, Detective Morrison said. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone else in the community. If Miss Patterson gets wind that we're investigating, she might destroy evidence or try to cover her tracks. That was harder than it sounded. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I had to deflect questions from other residents about the landscaping contract and the financial records. We said we were still reviewing the documents and would share information when we had a full picture. It wasn't entirely a lie, just incomplete. Meanwhile, life in Pinecrest Estates continued. The landscaping crew did start coming at 7:30 instead of 6:45, which was a small improvement. I continued riding my snowmobile on weekend mornings, and nobody said a word about it. Brenda seemed subdued at the May board meeting, going through the motions but without her usual aggressive confidence. The break in the case came in late June. Detective Morrison called me at work. "We've made significant progress. I need you and Mr. Chen to come down to the station this afternoon if possible. There are some things I want to show you." We met her at 3 o'clock in a small conference room. Spread across the table were bank statements, contracts, and what looked like text message transcripts. "We executed search warrants on the HOA's bank accounts and Brenda Patterson's personal and business accounts," Morrison explained. "The pattern is clear. Money flows from the HOA to her consulting companies, which are really just shell entities. She's the sole owner and operator. No services were actually provided." "What about the landscaping company?" Marcus asked. Morrison pulled out a transcript. "We interviewed the owner of Green Mountain Landscaping, a man named Derek Foster. Initially, he denied everything, but when we told him he could be charged as an accomplice to fraud, he cooperated. He admitted that Brenda approached him 3 years ago with a deal. He would inflate his bid for the HOA contract by $20,000 a year, and in exchange, he would pay her company $12,000 annually as a consulting fee. He keeps $8,000, she keeps $12,000, and the HOA pays for all of it." "So it's exactly what we thought," I said. "It gets better," Morrison continued. "Once Foster started talking, he told us about other HOAs where Brenda did similar deals. She's on the board of 2 other communities in the area. We're investigating those now, but preliminary evidence suggests the same pattern. We're looking at potential total theft of over $200,000 across multiple HOAs. "When will charges be filed?" Marcus asked. "We're presenting the case to the county attorney next week. Based on the evidence, I expect they'll file multiple felony counts: theft, embezzlement, fraud. This is serious prison time if she's convicted." The arrest happened on July 8th. I heard about it from Mr. Jennings, who called me excitedly that morning. "They just took Brenda away in handcuffs." Sheriff's deputies showed up at her house at 7 a.m. My wife saw the whole thing from our window. The news spread through the community like wildfire. By afternoon, the Pinecrest Estates Facebook group was exploding with speculation and shock. The local Bozeman news outlets picked up the story that evening. "HOA president arrested for embezzlement," read the headline on the Bozeman Daily Chronicle's website. The article outlined the charges: 4 counts of felony theft, 3 counts of embezzlement, and 2 counts of fraud. The HOA had to respond. Gary Simmons and Patricia Keller called an emergency meeting for July 10th. The community center was packed once again, but the mood was different. People were angry, betrayed, demanding answers. Gary looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. "First, I want to say that Patricia and I had no knowledge of Brenda's illegal activities. The moment we learned about the investigation, we cooperated fully with law enforcement." "How did you not know?" someone shouted. "You're on the board." "Brenda handled the finances," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "She was the president and the treasurer. She gave us summary reports at meetings, but we didn't see the detailed transactions. We trusted her. That trust cost us over $100,000, Tom Rodriguez said bitterly. "We're taking steps to recover the stolen funds," Gary said. "The HOA's insurance policy includes coverage for theft by board members. We've filed a claim, and the insurance company is working on reimbursement. Additionally, the county attorney has indicated that restitution will be part of any plea agreement or sentencing if Brenda is convicted." "What about the landscaping contract?" I asked. "We're terminating it immediately for cause," Gary said. The fraud voids the contract. We're going back out for bids, and this time we'll have proper oversight and multiple board members reviewing the proposals. And the consulting payments, Marcus pressed. All contracts for services over $5,000 will now require a full board vote and disclosure to the membership 30 days in advance, Patricia said. We're also hiring an independent auditor to review the past 5 years of HOA finances and make recommendations for better financial controls. It was damage control, but it seemed genuine. Gary and Patricia were clearly embarrassed and eager to make things right. The question was whether the membership would trust them to continue serving on the board. Over the next several weeks, the legal process played out. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney's office was uninterested in anything short of significant prison time. The evidence was too strong, the amount too large, and the breach of trust too egregious. The preliminary hearing was in August. I attended with Marcus and several other residents. Brenda looked diminished in her orange jail jumpsuit, standing before the judge as the charges were read. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea, and bail was set at $50,000, which she posted through a bondsman. The trial was scheduled for October, but in late September, Brenda's attorney contacted the county attorney with a new plea offer. Facing the overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a long prison sentence, Brenda agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for the prosecution recommending a sentence on the lower end of the guidelines. The sentencing hearing was on October 23rd. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Brenda sat at the defense table in a navy suit, looking straight ahead. Several HOA members were there, including Marcus, Sarah Wu, Tom Rodriguez, and Mr. Jennings. We'd all submitted victim impact statements describing how her crimes had affected the community. The judge, a severe-looking woman named Judge Patricia Ramsey, reviewed the case file before speaking. "Miss Patterson, you held a position of trust. Homeowners in 3 different communities relied on you to manage their collective funds responsibly and in their best interests. Instead, you systematically stole from them over a period of 3 years. The amount involved is substantial, over $200,000 across all victims. The sophistication of your scheme, involving shell companies and kickback arrangements, shows this was not a momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated, ongoing criminal enterprise." Brenda's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client accepts full responsibility for her actions. She's agreed to pay full restitution and has cooperated with authorities to identify all the funds and accounts involved. She asks the court for leniency and the opportunity to make amends." Judge Ramsey was unmoved. "Cooperation after being caught is expected, not commendable. The guidelines for these offenses recommend 42 to 54 months in prison. Given the amount involved, the number of victims, and the breach of fiduciary duty, I'm sentencing you to 48 months in the Montana State Women's Prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You're ordered to pay restitution in the full amount of $214,000 to the affected HOAs. You're also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or in any fiduciary capacity." Brenda's shoulders slumped. Her attorney helped her stand as the bailiff approached. She was led away without looking at anyone in the gallery. Outside the courtroom, there was a sense of grim satisfaction among those of us who'd attended. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the damage or the betrayal. 4 years seems light, Tom said. "White-collar criminals usually get less time than they should," Marcus replied. "But the restitution order is enforceable. The HOA will get its money back eventually, even if it takes years." "What happens now with the HOA?" Sarah asked. "We have an election next month," I said. "The board is dissolving and starting fresh. Anyone can run. It's a chance to rebuild the right way." The election in November brought significant changes to Pinecrest Estates. Gary and Patricia both declined to run again, exhausted by the scandal and eager to step back. A slate of new candidates emerged, including Marcus, Sarah Wu, and surprisingly me. I'd never planned to be on the HOA board. I'd moved to Pinecrest Estates to avoid drama, to have a quiet place to live and work and enjoy Montana's winters. But the experience with Brenda and the whole noise complaint fiasco had shown me that HOAs only work when engaged. Honest people are willing to serve. The election was held online and by paper ballot, with unprecedented turnout. Nearly 80% of homeowners voted. When the results were announced, Marcus, Sarah, and I had been elected to the 3-member board. Our platform had been simple: transparency, accountability, and common-sense enforcement of rules. Our first meeting as the new board was in December, a full year after the whole Snowmobile incident had started. We held it in the community center on a cold evening, and about 20 residents showed up to watch. One of our first orders of business was reviewing the new landscaping contract. We'd accepted a bid from Summit Property Services, the company that had originally bid $42,000 3 years ago. Their new bid was $48,000, which still saved the HOA $20,000 annually compared to the inflated Green Mountain contract. More importantly, they'd agreed to use newer, quieter equipment and to schedule work between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. to minimize disruption. We also established new financial controls. All contracts over $5,000 required full board approval with documentation. Monthly financial statements would be posted on the HOA website for any homeowner to review. An independent audit would be conducted annually by a third-party firm, and we updated the noise bylaws. After months of research and input from residents, we established clear, objective standards. Daytime noise limits of 85 dBA for residential activities, with exceptions for emergency work and county-permitted construction. The vague, excessive noise language was replaced with measurable criteria that applied equally to everyone. The changes weren't dramatic or revolutionary. They were practical, fair, and designed to prevent the kind of arbitrary enforcement and financial misconduct that had plagued the community. It was boring, responsible governance, which was exactly what an HOA should be. By the time spring arrived again, Pinecrest Estates felt like a different place. The new landscaping crew worked efficiently and quietly, arriving at reasonable hours. Residents felt more engaged, attending meetings and actually reading the financial reports. The sense of community improved as people felt they had a voice again. As for me, I still rode my snowmobile on winter mornings, taking it out to the trails and enjoying the Montana wilderness. Nobody complained. Nobody sent threatening letters. Nobody measured decibels or threatened liens. It was exactly what it should have been all along: a guy enjoying his property and his community without unnecessary drama. The insurance reimbursement came through in March, covering most of what Brenda had stolen. The HOA's reserves were replenished, and we were even able to fund some improvements to the common areas. New playground equipment, better lighting on the walking paths, and repairs to the community center. Brenda was serving her sentence at the Montana State Women's Prison in Billings. According to the Department of Corrections website, her earliest possible release date was in 3.5 years. The restitution payments were being garnished from her pension and any future earnings. It would take a long time, but the money would eventually be recovered. I thought about her sometimes, wondering how someone ends up stealing from their own community. Was it greed? Ego? A sense of entitlement that came from years of unchecked authority? I didn't know, and ultimately it didn't matter. What mattered was that the system had worked. Evidence was gathered, laws were enforced, and justice was served. More importantly, the community learned something valuable. HOAs can be a force for good, maintaining property values and community standards. But they require oversight, engagement, and accountability. When residents pay attention, ask questions, and demand transparency, abuse becomes much harder to hide. Marcus and I still met for beers occasionally, usually at a pub downtown where we could watch the mountains and talk about anything except HOA business. But one evening in May, almost 18 months after the initial snowmobile complaint, he raised his glass in a toast. "To standing up to bullies," he said, "and to measuring decibels." I clinked my glass against his. "And to communities that actually work the way they're supposed to." The sun was setting behind the Bridger Range, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Bozeman was beautiful in the spring, the snow melting from the valleys while the peaks remained white. I thought about my house in Pinecrest Estates, my workshop in the garage, my snowmobile waiting for next winter. I'd bought that house looking for a fresh start, a place to rebuild my life after my divorce. I'd found that, but I'd also found something unexpected. The importance of community, the value of standing up for what's right, and the satisfaction of holding people accountable when they abuse their power. It had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But in the end, it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Pinecrest Estates who deserved better than a corrupt HOA president and arbitrary rule enforcement. As we finished our beers and headed out into the Montana evening, I felt genuinely content. Not because I'd won some battle or proven a point, but because I'd helped make my community a better place. Sometimes that's all you can do. And sometimes that's enough. The next weekend, I fired up my Polaris and headed out to the trails. The engine started with its familiar rumble, a sound that no longer carried any threat of fines or letters or legal action. It was just a snowmobile, producing its reasonable 78 decibels for a few minutes before I rode off into the wilderness. Behind me, Pinecrest Estates continued its quiet Saturday morning. A few neighbors were out washing cars, kids playing in yards, someone mowing their lawn. All producing their own noise, living their own lives, in a community that finally understood the difference between reasonable activity and actual disturbance. And somewhere, probably buried in a file at the sheriff's office, was a decibel meter and stacks of evidence showing that sometimes the loudest noise isn't the one being complained about. Sometimes it's the silence of people who should be speaking up, asking questions, and demanding accountability. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, starting with a $500 fine for a snowmobile that was quieter than the HOA's own landscaping crew. But I'd learned it well, and I wouldn't forget it. The trail opened up before me, fresh powder from last night's snow covering the path. I accelerated, the cold air rushing past my helmet, the mountains rising around me in their ancient silence. This was why I lived here. This was what made it all worthwhile. And back in the subdivision, the new landscaping crew would arrive on Monday at 8 a.m., not 6:45. Using equipment that met reasonable noise standards and respecting the residents they served. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought over big principles or dramatic injustices. Sometimes they're fought over snowmobiles and leaf blowers and HOA bylaws. And sometimes those battles teach us the most important lessons about fairness, accountability, and what it means to be part of a community. I rode for another hour, following the trail deeper into the backcountry, leaving all thoughts of HOAs and noise complaints and embezzlement behind. Out here, there were no bylaws, no board meetings, no violation notices. Just snow and sky and mountains. But I knew I'd be riding back eventually, back to my house and my community and my responsibilities as a board member. And that was okay. Because that community was worth caring about, worth fighting for, worth the effort it took to make it work properly. The sun climbed higher, brilliant against the snow. I pointed my snowmobile toward home, ready for whatever came next. The drama was over. The corrupt board member was in prison. The rules were fair and enforced consistently. Justice, in its imperfect way, had been served. And my snowmobile, still running perfectly, still producing its harmless 78 decibels, still legal and proper and completely reasonable, just the way it should be.